You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Debbie Malone is used to sceptics. She's been brushed aside and turned away and sworn at by people who say she's a liar, that she's making things up. You see, Debbie is a psychic. In fact, she says we all have psychic abilities. It's just some people are better at channeling them than others. Turns out, she's very good at it. For the past 30 years, she's been using her abilities to help police investigate murders and find missing people. Working on everything from the Ivan Milat backpacker killings, the disappearance of Bob Chappell, and the murder of 6-year-old Keisha Weippeart. She used to be a skeptic herself, but something changed in her late 20s, and suddenly she couldn't turn off the visions. Debbie has worked with some of the most highly respected police officers and departments in the country. She doesn't solve their cases for them. She sees herself as more of a puzzle piece, a psychic detective who helps them make sense of the clues, find murder scenes and burial sites, and most terrifyingly, provide context as to how and where someone died, often through the eyes of the killer themselves. I'm Gemma Bass, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. But this month, instead of deep diving into one criminal case each episode, we're looking behind the crime, talking with people who actually work behind the scenes. Today, you're going to find out how a psychic medium uses her skills to help police crack some of the most baffling and horrific crimes in Australia. And just before you hear our conversation, be aware this episode does contain graphic depictions of violent crimes, as well as child abuse. Debbie, have you always had psychic abilities?
Yeah, I've had it since a child, but I really didn't embrace it. It used to terrify me. I had my first near-death experience at 3.
3?
Yeah, I had bronchiolitis, and I always felt I was different even when I was little, but I used to see things in my room, and I remember when I was in the hospital, this beautiful white lady came to me and she was sort of floating around me, and now I realised she was my guardian angel. But, you know, when you're 3, you don't sort of realise. And then I sort of had other little bits and pieces as I got older.
Does this stuff get carried down through generations? Is it something that your family, like your mother or your grandmother or something, had told you about or were looking out for you?
Yeah, I understand, yes, now that it has come through my family. At the time, I didn't realise. My nanny used to talk about there was going to be a hole in the sky if we used aerosols, and she made my mum throw out all of her sprays and Mr. Sheen and things, and she gave me the John Sens Game ESP, but my mum wouldn't let me play with it.
Well, she was right about that one.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had your first near-death experience at 3. That wasn't your only near-death experience. No,
I had another one at 13 when I had my appendix out. My heart stopped from the anaesthetic, and I've had a lot of illness through my life, and I've had to have a lot of operations and anaesthetics. So to date, I've had now 7, and I've had quite a lot of OBEs, which are out-of-body experiences.
7. Do you think that has helped you to be able to channel these abilities?
Yeah, I think it has enhanced it. I believe that we are all psychic, though, and I think that some things, sometimes a trauma or a stress, or you might just have an awakening. So I think we can all tune into it, but some people might be better at it than others.
How did a miscarriage change things for you in 1992?
When I had the miscarriage, it was a time when the backpacker murders were a major thing on the news and the radio.
So Ivan Milat?
Yes, Ivan Milat. And that's when it all really started. I just used to see visions every night, every day after watching the news or hearing the radio. At first, so I just thought I was just watching too much television, so I didn't put it down to anything, but then it developed that I was starting to see it before it was actually on the television.
Can you describe some of those visions?
Yeah, I would see it through the murderer's eyes, so I didn't know who he was at that stage, but I would see him taking the 2 English backpackers. So I saw him behind them, I saw him with a gun. Then I would become the girls and I would feel terrified and I'd be wanting to run away. I'd just see glimpses in the beginning. I didn't see it like I do now, and I wouldn't be awake when I would see it. It would be more through trying to meditate or through a dream state.
So you could see their faces, see the hair colour, see what they look like?
Yes, I could. And then I started to see other victims before they were put together in the media. That was getting really freaky.
What did you do with that information? Did you go to police?
I did. I grew up in publishing myself. I was a graphic designer and a typesetter. So I was working for Fairfax community newspapers at the time and kept telling one of the journalists there what I was seeing. So he did a story about me and he called me Julia. And he asked me to pick what demographic in the newspapers that I wanted it to go to. So he had about 36 newspapers and I picked the MacArthur Advertiser. And that was where Ivan Milat lived at the time.
Did you know that? You did that on purpose?
I just had a feeling. They gave me a map and said, where do you think he comes from? And I said, it just jumped off the map. And I said, it's over in this area, so let's focus there.
Wow. And what happened?
After that, his girlfriend, Sherlinda Hughes, made contact with the newspaper and she wanted to meet up with me. I didn't ever meet up with her in person, but I did have quite a number of phone calls with her.
What was she trying to get from you?
Well, she thought Ivan was innocent and she wanted my help to actually get him off, which was very freaky.
Which is the opposite of what you were seeing.
Yes, the exact opposite.
How does one even pick up a phone and call the police and tell them, I know what happened? I didn't do it, but I've seen it. Like, how do you have that conversation?
That was the hardest part. I think in the beginning I had a girlfriend and one of her best friends was a police officer. So she spoke to me first. Then she put me in contact with her husband, who was also a police officer. Then they ended up putting me in contact with the backpacker unit. And I had to speak with one of the head officers on the case. And then he sort of gave me the grill as if to say, well, have you had any mental health issues? You know, what's your medical history? Are you a psychic? And I said, I don't know. I just sort of started. And then he asked me what information I was getting. And then after some time, they ended up assigning 2 detectives to me. And I would just record all of my visions. And they were all out of order at that stage. So he said, just write it down with the date, whatever you see, and then they would pick it up when I'd get enough information.
Wow. So did it help them? Did it help them find him or convict him or anything like that?
I think it was more clues and information that I gave to them. It's hard to say that psychics solve all the crimes because I think we're just a part of a puzzle.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty arrogant when people just think that, or if a psychic thinks they're going to solve everything, because you don't get exact details. And in the beginning for me, it was quite like pieces of a jigsaw. And it was out of order. Now I get things and I can get things a lot more accurately. But, yeah, it is hard. And then the other thing is when you know too much, then they think that you're involved or that what's your alibi because they wonder, where you were on such and such a date. So I have had times where I've been accused to being involved and that, that I'd have to go to court.
And prove your innocence?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Does that make you not want to tell them if you've got that level of detail that you can give them?
I've got some really great officers that I've worked with over the years now, and I think through my credibility that, I've sort of got through doing this work, I think it's okay now. But in the beginning it was terrifying. And I've had people come after me. They've broken into my office. They've threatened me at my book talks, they've waited for me in the car park. So I've had a lot of things.
What kind of people?
Well, people that are connected to the crimes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that in the beginning you couldn't really, I guess, hone the skill as much. You're many, many years, decades down the track now. How have you managed to hone that skill?
Well, initially I tried to turn it off. I tried everything. I went to a learning circle to learn to shut it down, but then it made it worse. So I just decided that you can't beat them, join them. So through practice, and initially there wasn't really classes back then. I remember going to a crystal shop and sort of trying to find a book on, to help me. And the lady took me at the back of the shop and she said, this is the occult section, it's we keep this hidden under the counter because, it's witchcraft, which it's not. But, it was a bit freaky. And through my own experience, and I learnt to do what's called psychometry. So psychometry is soul measuring or soul reading. So from holding an item, I would hold that and I would become the victim or I can be a witness. So I can actually see or feel things from holding that on. It's like watching TV, well, not TV, but like watching a vision through your hands.
I know this sounds silly, but when you're holding an item, do you close your eyes? Where do you see it? Is it in front of you in the room?
Yeah, it's all of those things. So when I hold it, I'll just shut my eyes for, a minute or two. Then I have like a vision that'll come usually to the right-hand side of me. It's like watching TV. Sometimes it's like I pop into it, so I'm actually there. Sometimes when I'm on a crime scene, I'll see it when it's all been cleaned up and, it might have even been renovated, but I can actually be standing there and it'll take me back in time, and I can be seeing the murderer do the crime. I can be the victim being murdered or raped or stabbed.
I know that you've been doing this for a while now, but do you get apprehensive before you touch an item, not knowing where you're going to go?
Yeah, it is a little bit nerve-wracking, and it's also about wanting to be giving them the best and most accurate information possible. I think it's more a matter of that.
How often do the police call on you? And is it specific teams? Is it individuals in the force?
It just depends, I think. With COVID, there's not been so much. Sometimes it'll come through a family. I try not to work on a case unless the police are involved because of my own personal safety and danger. Because sometimes some of the people that have come to ask me to look into something, they're involved in the crime.
Gotcha.
And so if I know too much, then I'm going to be a threat. So I would prefer to work with the police.
And by the sounds of how this all started, you didn't make a conscious effort to actually involve yourself in the crime side of things and the missing person kind of things. Like, that's a very specific area of being psychic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It was very eye-opening for me. I wasn't someone who would like to watch true crime at the time, and, I wouldn't like to watch murders because it wasn't my thing. But now it's turned around and, and seeing things. And sometimes I can watch the news and see something, and then I can see kind of what's happened to the person.
I was going to say, can you even watch a true crime documentary without seeing something now?
No.
So you just don't watch that if you want to, have a peaceful night.
Yeah, well, sometimes I think if I've got information that might come through, then that's good. But I only really choose to work on cases if I'm asked to by the police or they're going to work with me, because it's hard working with families. They don't need to know the gruesome details of what happened to their loved one.
I want to talk a bit more about, how you became involved with the police force, because the police, by nature of their profession, are very black and white people.
Mm-hmm.
How did you gain their trust?
Oh, it took quite a while, and some officers have been extremely wonderful and some have been extremely rude. One asked me to go and work on a case down in Young, but he said to me if I found the body, then he was going to arrest me because I must have done it, because I would have to have known where it was.
So he asked for your help and then turned it back on you?
Yeah, so I didn't bother going.
Yeah, no.
And I do all my work pro bono as well. So it's not like I'm getting anything out of it financially, not that I'd want to. I feel it's more a matter of, helping loved ones. They need to know what's happened to their loved one, or at least be able to, put them to rest and have a place to sort of honour them.
To give listeners an idea, on your website you've got some testimonials from, former detectives, sergeants. They say things like, Debbie's insights into the criminal mind are shocking and very real, and things like, she is the real deal. But there would still be plenty of cops that wouldn't support your work.
Yeah, a lot of the time, the police say that they don't work with psychics, but they do. And each state's the same thing, but I've worked on cases in all states bar South Australia.
There will also be a lot of listeners that are sceptics. You said you were one yourself.
Of course.
What's it like to have a job where people are constantly questioning if it's real?
Yeah, I think it's not for me to change their minds. It's more a matter of opening their minds and letting them make their own decision. And I think sometimes people need to have their own experience, because I was a skeptic. My friends would go and have readings and I wouldn't go and have a reading. And here I am, that's what I do. So it's kind of strange. But I think once we have our own personal experience or personal awakening, a lot of the time it's when we lose a loved one as well, then we're looking for them and you're wanting to know, are they okay on the other side? And I think that's when things start to change with people.
Let's focus on some of the cases that you've worked on.
Yes.
I want to start with Keisha.
Yes.
She was 6 years old. She was killed by her mother in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Did the police reach out to you in that case?
Initially, Keisha's family did. So her stepfather's brother and his wife, they came to me, and I was given Keisha's hat, which featured in a lot of the images of her. So it was the Dora the Explorer hat.
Yeah, I remember it. Little bucket hat.
Yeah, little bucket hat. So from holding that, I started to see the dreadful life that poor little girl had. And then two of the beautiful officers I've worked with in the past from the dog unit, they made contact with me when they were doing searches. I was supposed to go and search with them at different times, but then things happened and it didn't end up working out. But I would tune in through Google Maps and they'd be on location and I'd be sort of telling them what I was seeing when they were on the location. So sometimes we'd work that way.
What were you seeing? Were you able to push them in certain directions?
Well, I was getting all different things. With Keisha, I could smell like bushfire, like burning. I felt that there was BMX bike tracks near where she was. I could see big electrical stanchions, like, power line stanchions. I wasn't sure if it's a suitcase or a bag, but I thought she was put into a bag or a suitcase because I felt like she was all scrunched up. But then I felt that she was dead but hadn't been taken away from the property at first. I felt that she could have been in a garage or a shed or something closer to the house.
And most of that, if not all of that, is what happened.
Yeah, and it's dreadful to think such a beautiful little girl was just discarded. But I think the torture that I saw that she went through was the worst. Seeing her burnt with cigarette butts and her teeth being broken and her hair being pulled. The reason she used to wear the hats is to cover up the bald spots that she had,
So when you're seeing Keisha, is it through her eyes?
It was funny when she did come to me because my old office, I had this fairy tree and it was kind of like a fairy tree that was of remembrance because there's been lots of little ones that I've worked on. So some of the family members had given me these fairies, so I'd put them on the tree and Keisha was fascinated with it. And she was whistling because I was doing a workshop and we were sort of tuning in and everyone could hear this little girl whistling. But instead of, when you whistle, you blow out, she was sort of doing it, sort of sucking in.
That's how I whistle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what she was doing. Yeah. And everyone could hear it. We went into the room and we were going, what's going on? And then we started to film in the room and you could see there was this energy around this fairy tree. And she was just delighted. It was just like she was just being a happy, healthy little child and playing with the fairies. It was really cute.
And then from there, does she show you what happened to her or do you get flashes of what happened to her?
Yeah, I got flashes of it and just about her life and even just the malnourishment, not being fed and wanting to go to school. She wasn't a naughty little girl. I think she was a busy little girl. And I think they didn't send her to school because then they would see, the injuries that she was sustaining. It was just, it was very heart-wrenching to sort of see that someone could do that to a little, beautiful little girl, especially when she was in a happy foster home prior. Then they took her back and then, we know what happened.
Obviously you channeled her through her hat and she visited you. What happens after you've kind of finished talking to the family or the police? Does she still visit you or does she move on?
Yeah, sometimes they hang around for a little while. I think it's more with getting the closure. But yeah, it's hard. It's sometimes for me, I sort of just have to let them go. Like it's visualising them going into the light and, being happy and, sort of evolving to the next stage.
I have heard you talking about one person that does still kind of hang around, Chris Noble.
Yes, he does. He's so cheeky.
So for some context, Chris, he was killed in a bomb blast at a convenience store below the apartment where he lived in Sydney in 2015 and you met with his mother.
Yes.
What were you able to tell her?
Oh, yeah, just different things about his travels and even about what had happened. But I think the hardest thing, he wasn't supposed to be moving soon and, he wasn't going to be there anymore. And, I think it's more about the love of the family and just about the cheeky things that he used to do. And like I was saying about a wolf, but it's because he used to play American football. So the team, I think they were called the Wolves. And, sometimes you see different colours of what their uniforms are and, different experiences.
So in that instance, he was the victim of a crime.
Yes.
But you were mainly there to kind of give comfort to his family.
Yes. I think it was more just to give messages. And sometimes there are sort of obscure things that you see or feel. And sometimes you think, oh, should I say that? That's a bit silly. But when you do, the person's eyes light up. And they go, how do you know that? And they go, only Chris and I would know that, or only, whoever it is I'm tuning into, only they would know that.
So it might sound weird to you, but then when you vocalise it.
Yeah, I've realised that the messages aren't for me. I'm just the messenger to give the message.
The reason I brought Chris up is because you spoke to Mia on another podcast that we have called No Filter, and you mentioned that he was still around. You'd see him sometimes. That was quite a few years ago now.
Yes.
Is he still here with you?
I don't pick him up as much as I used to, but I still have contact with his mum.
Right.
Yeah, so we've sort of made contact quite, I made her a special little silver jewellery piece in honour of him for her.
Does she see him now because of working with you?
Yes, I think it's opened all the family up, and yeah, she does. She feels him around. And I think this is the thing that when we talk about are we all psychic, we do have different experiences. So sometimes we might have what's called clairalience, and that's when we smell something. So we might smell someone's aftershave or their deodorant or their perfume or their hairspray. So that's the thing a lot of us get, but it doesn't stay there all the time, or it might be a cooking smell.
That's really curious because my grandma, my Oma, she passed away a few years ago, and I buy a specific type of hair spray because it smells like her.
Yes. Is it Cedal?
Yes.
Yes.
Stop. That's terrifying.
Because I can smell it.
I've got it in my hair and I wear it every day because it reminds me of her.
Yeah, well, that's part of our psychic abilities.
Really?
Yeah, we have quite a few different ones. We have clairgustance as well. These are quite rare ones we don't talk about a lot. But clairgustance is when we taste something, we might taste some food, so especially Christmas time. It might be the brandy pudding, it might be the baked dinner or their special dessert, and we have that taste or the smell, and we think of Christmas or we think of that time in the past. Music's another thing that brings back a lot of memories. You'll hear songs, and sometimes when we lose somebody, their favourite song just seems to keep appearing on the radio even though it might be 10 years old. So that's another way of them coming back to you.
So I guess this is making me realise, like, all those things that you kind of do because you think it's just a way to remember someone, there's something more to that.
Definitely. That's them connecting with you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so their love never dies. That's the most important thing to remember.
Oh, that's very comforting.
Yeah.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Bath. I'm speaking with psychic detective Debbie Malone. Tell me about your involvement in the murders of Sydney nurses Lorraine and Wendy. That was in 1974, so a long time ago.
Yes.
How were you brought into that?
I was on a program called Sensing Murder, and so I was flown up to Brisbane and then taken out to Toowoomba. We didn't really know anything about it. We were just, what they would do, they'd have 3 psychics on every episode. Only 2 would make it to air, so the 2 of the most common denominators would be the ones chosen. So I was given a little Victorian ring. It had a little seed pearls in it, and it had a little star and a little moon. And I was given that. That was on her body at the time she was murdered. So I held that and then told them what I saw. So they'd take you in studio for an hour. Then the next day they'd drive you up there. So they took us out to the back of Murphy's Creek and just said, all right, get out of the car. What do you see? And go and tell me what you get. And it was just horrific. It's one of the most horrific crimes I've ever worked on. And I've been to the location twice now with 2 different programs. And so I got out of the car and I was drawn into the bush, and I could hear them screaming and yelling. I could see them on the ground, and they'd been hog-tied. They'd been gang raped, both the girls, but they'd been, really badly bashed. I could see their belongings all around on the ground, even though they were no longer there. I could see an area where there was a bonfire had been, and there was still some of the remnants of that, even because I think I did that in 2003. So
decades later.
Yeah, and so there was still the remnants of the bonfire and some of the old beer cans. Then they took me down near this river. It was a dried up river when I was there. But they sort of showed me what had happened, and I sort of told them all about it and what the people looked like. Kept getting the name Snake and a tattoo with a snake, and that was the nickname of one of the perpetrators.
Wow. That sounds like a really overwhelming scene to walk into.
Oh, it's probably one of the most gruesome things I've ever experienced. And I've had a lot of contact with Eric Wilson, Lorraine's brother, over the years. I've been there twice. I went with a Japanese TV program as well. So we went up there about 5 years ago, and the area was there's a lot more vegetation there, and it had changed significantly. But some of those people that were perpetrators are still out, and the town hasn't changed. And it was really strange when we went the second time, because there was certain vehicles that I had seen in my visions, and one of them was a blue EH with a white roof and Venetians in the back. When we were up there in Toowoomba, this car drove past. The exact vehicle drove past. And it was like, in this time, that there's not many of those vehicles around.
In the real world or the spirit world?
Real world. So that was really freaky.
That's freaky.
And they kept showing me butterflies. And when we were filming some of the final bits for the episode, this big butterfly came and just landed on my head and then flew off right when we were filming, because I said, that's a sign with the butterflies. And they said, this is crazy. It's a butterfly from nowhere just came and landed on you. And I said, well, I think they're happy that we're here. I was really sick in 2018, 2019, and I had to go to St. George Hospital to have some scans. And I got a bit lost, and I got lost, but I thought I was, but I wasn't. And I went down this back way, and there was this memorial for both the girls.
That you stumbled across?
Yeah, I stumbled across. I didn't even know it was there, and it was like, oh my God, that I felt like it was a sign that they were saying thank you.
Wow. I wanted to talk about the disappearance of 2 Illawarra teenagers. So that was in 1979, and you worked on the case in 2010 or mid-2000s. In that case, there was a very sceptical police officer. I want you to tell me about him and how you changed his mind.
Oh, he's so funny. Yeah, so Roger Mayer, he's now retired, but he was part of the dog squad. And I remember we'd already gone down to 7 Mile Beach because I could see it was a location near the water and the vegetation fitted. So they didn't really tell him and the other officer, Dave Cole, what I was. So I met them and they were having lunch. They were sitting there having Subway and they said, oh, come and meet the guys. I'm sitting there and Roger says, so what do you do? Are you a witness or something? And I said, oh, kind of. And Kath Flood was the detective that I was there with. And she said, well, maybe you should tell them, Debbie. And I'm like, oh, no, this is going to be awful. And when I told him, he said, I don't believe in this expletive. And it was like, what are you doing here? You're just going to waste my time. And I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be a bad day. And it was so funny because by the end of the day, well, we've been great mates ever since.
How did you change his mind?
We had this really strange experience. To this day, I'll never forget it. I was looking in the bush and what I would normally do, they'll give me some surveyor's tape, so it's like fluoro pink tape, and then I will go and mark off areas that I get psychic energy. So I was walking in and around and it was a really still day. It was around December, kind of this time of the year, so it was really quite warm and very still. And I got into this point and then I felt I was being chased. It was like I became one of the girls and I was just running and I didn't know where I was going. I've never had this experience before. It's like I was taken over. And then when I went to come out, I couldn't find my way out. And then this big whirlwind of energy came around me and all these leaves were blowing up and it was just really strange. And Roger could see that I was a bit distressed and he sort of said, what are you doing in there? And he came in to get me. And when he did, the same thing happened to him. And it was around us and it was just swirling. And he said, I don't know what happened in there, but he says, after all these years of being a cop, I've never had that before. But he experienced it as well.
And he saw it. He didn't just feel it.
No, yeah, he saw it. And apparently one of the areas I marked off, I only just found this out, was it last year, the year before, that there was another woman that had been murdered in there by her husband and she'd been hung in there. So the area that I had picked up and tagged off, it wasn't to do with those girls, it was to do with another murder. Yes. There's like a whole other chapter to what's gone on with that because a lady contacted me about 4 or 5 years ago because I did the identikits of the perpetrators.
Because you saw them? So
yes,
you could draw them?
Yeah, so I did them and then they released it into the Illawarra Mercury. So quite a few people contacted me. And one lady contacted me and unfortunately she passed at the beginning of the year and I'm so devastated. They never interviewed her.
Oh.
And then it's hard to because with the officers they've been moved into different sections and so that sort of it's gone to a different part now. But this poor lady, she was picked up at the same location with another girl and she said to me that they had taken her to the farm. And the farm, it used to be a surfing area and she said that she was taken down there and it was a 2-door car and one of the men in the identikits matched. And she said that she used to live in Sydney and she'd go down on the weekends and stay in the caravan park with her mum and dad. And she told her mum and dad they were going to the movies, but they weren't. They went to this fellowship thing and then the girl that she'd met there, she knew her through the fellowship, but this girl was a local. So they got this lift from these boys. And then they drove them down to the farm and then she was getting quite nervous and she said that one of them turned around and he had a knife and he said to her that he was going to rape them, then he was going to kill them. But the other guy in the car was not so happy about that happening, so he pulled the seat forward and they ended up getting out and then the 2 guys ended up having a fight. So she said she ended up with the other girl and they hid in the bushes for some time and they got back.
So have those men been caught?
No, well, there's more to the story.
Oh, gosh.
I need to write. I haven't written this down. There was this memorial about the farm because the farm is now a national park. The people used to own the property. Anyway, there's a person who fits the whole identikit who was on Facebook who had then put this memory about, because it was the 40 years memory of the girls being murdered. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll never forget what happened on the farm 40 years ago. And then I started to track back and I found his photos. And the person who he was connected to, we've got them, but nothing's been done.
So you know who it is?
Well, I'm pretty sure. I can't say I'm 100%, but I'm pretty sure, yes. And nothing's been done yet.
That must be so frustrating.
Oh, you have no idea the frustration I've gone. I've gone undercover down in Victoria on another crime. actually sat with the perpetrator for 2.5 hours, and then there's nothing being done. And this perpetrator has sent me over 1,500 pages of information about this very big crime down there. And it's all been passed to police, and it's just nothing's happened.
Is it because what you do is hard to prove?
I think so, but I think if they just would investigate, and the person that I primarily worked with on the one in Victoria, he was the ex-head of the task force, but he's retired. So then he passed it on to other people, and then now they've just parked it. So that's the problem. And because he's not an officer anymore and he now lives overseas. Yeah, so this is the problem. And it's also, I can't blame the officers. I think it's money, and because these crimes are so old, how many people go missing a day? And
so many new crimes.
Yeah, so I think they probably put their resources into what they think they've got more option of solving. But it still makes it difficult for the people of the ones that are lost.
Of course. And, you knowing that they're still out there.
It's very, very frustrating. And it was quite frightening too, sitting for 2.5 hours with this guy, and he was very odd, and telling me in particular what one of the victims, how her hair was at the time. And he was going on and on about her hair was different to the images in the photos that the media had. He knew what underwear she had on. He knew a whole lot of things. And it's like,
I hadn't thought about that. You would sit or see through the eyes of some pretty horrible people.
You do. It can be quite frightening. And sometimes people have just come for a reading. And then when you see what that person does, you have to be extremely careful because...
Oh, so you can tell sitting across from someone if they're a bad person.
Yeah.
Does it give you any insights into how evil works, how these people's minds work?
Yeah, it does. I think sometimes it's hard to think that they're using their intelligence in bad ways instead of good ways. But I suppose we're all different. We're all wired differently. You wonder what happened to that person to make them think that way, or why do they think inflicting pain or harm on someone is okay? Or what happened to them when they were growing up, or, what did they experience to make them that way? Had they gone through trauma themselves?
So you would get an insight, I would say, a lot of murderers, not all murderers, but there are a lot of murderers that are psychopaths.
Yes.
So you would be able to see what it would be like to be without empathy.
Yes, and I think that's really hard. And sometimes for me, you just see the eyes just go black. It's just there's no feeling. But I also see the other side of it where they have a lot of enjoyment out of it too, and I think that's very, very sad and sick.
We've touched on a lot of the kind of more prominent cases that you've worked on, but is there any other crimes or cases that have stuck with you over the years?
Yes, Neve May, that's been one of the cases, and it really upsets me that I'd never found her. She came to me. I used to work on these Haunted Sydney tours that were in Sydney quite a few years ago. There used to be a hearse called Elvira, and I used to drive around the city, and they'd go to all the haunted locations, and they'd get me to do readings for everybody between each location.
Oh, gosh, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of energy.
And it used to take off from around here, so around King's Cross. So I did a tour. Then the next night I had this dream of this young girl, and she was in a hearse, but the hearse didn't have a roof on it, which was a bit crazy. But I saw her, and we were sitting at the lights, and she was beside us. So I was in Elvira, the other hearse, and I looked over and I saw her with this man with this really dark hair and dark eyes, and I saw the young girl, and I thought, I just don't want you in the car with him. I didn't know why. I didn't even know who she was. But I just thought, I want you out of the car. There's something bad's going to happen. And I didn't think anything of it. 2 weeks later, on the news, there was a missing persons case, and the person that they showed was the young girl of the dream.
Oh, wow.
And one of the detectives I'd worked with on the backpacker murders was in charge of the case. And
that's so you knew you could reach out.
Yeah, so that's the only reason I contacted him. And she was last seen in a hearse, and I thought, well, it's too many similarities.
What happened to her?
So she was working, sort of having a gap year, and she was working down at Batlow picking apples, and she'd met this guy down there that was working there as well, and he was a bit of an oddball, and she sort of befriended him. He took her out in the hearse and he killed her down in the forest, and her body's never been found. And he was arrested. He'd raped somebody else up in Queensland, and he ended up absconding from the police, and he jumped off the multi-level car park and killed himself.
So he'll never be able to.
No, so he's never arrested. And when I've gone down there on the location, he's been there as well, which was very strange.
Oh, his spirit.
Yeah, so he followed us down there because there was a certain area that I'd gone to because I'd never been there before. And the police sort of said to me, okay, well, here's a map, where do you want to go? And I'd had these visions that we had to pass an area with black and white cows, and there's only one area down there where the cows are. And then we got so far down, and then there was a washout of the road, so then we had to go around another way. But I ended up taking them to, I could guide them down there, I'd never been there before. And then we stopped on this side of the road near this bush where it was kind of where I thought she could be, but unfortunately we haven't found her, but I thought she could be around there. And then they got a photograph out, and it was of him and her leaning on the hearse right where we were standing.
Oh, creepy.
Yeah. But then I'm so upset because her family are absolutely beautiful, and I feel I let them down.
Especially because you could see the exact area. So it's kind of like, what am I missing? Where is she?
Yeah, and I think this is the hardest part. It's like connecting the dots, and it's not always, it's 5 Smith Street under the floorboards, And I think that's the thing. People get annoyed and people say, well, and to be honest, I've never found a body, but I can tell you, I can profile them and tell you what they do, what they look like. I've done quite a lot of identikits. I did the identikits for the Claremont serial killings.
Yeah.
And when he was arrested, we did one of what he would look like at the time he did it, and then we did an aged one when he was arrested. Very, very similar. Hair's a little bit curlier, but facial expressions, everything was pretty dead on.
You mentioned you'd been to court. Was that ever as a witness?
Yes. So the Teacher's Pet podcast, that's been very...
You went as a witness in that case? Why?
Because I worked on that case in 2003. Mm-hmm. So initially I was out in the garden and I was doing some gardening. My husband was watching a replay of Australian Story, and he said, Deb, you better come in here, have a look at this. And it was only about the last 5-10 minutes. And I came in, and then it was about Lynn Dawson. And then I started seeing all these things. So then I contacted the ABC, and then they put me in contact with the family and Damien Loon, the police officer on the case. So then they arranged that I would go to the family's house, and they did a video, like the police media unit did a video of it, and I told them, what I saw. And then I'd sort of said some like a location where I thought it would, where she is, which they still haven't searched that part, but anyway, because we went to the house and we were supposed to go back with the dog squad, and we never did because Damien was transferred into another section, into the major crime unit.
Where do you think Lynn is?
Well, unless he's moved her, I think she's at the back of the property because there's a big rock at the back of the property. And I don't know if it's there now though, because they have developed. It's been a long time since I've been there.
So you think he might have initially put her there?
Yes. So not at the front near the pool, I think at the back of the property. And he's also built retaining walls, so whether or not she was there. But there was a big rock, and she showed me about that.
Because there was a lot of focus on digging up the pool.
Yeah, digging up the pool, yes.
But you think it's further back?
I think it's further back. And when I had to go to court, not last year, the year before, I had to sit in front of him and say where I thought the body was, and he looked very uncomfortable.
Did he? On this show, we tell crime stories in a way that hopefully focus on and honour the victims. Many of them have had horrible deaths, which we've talked about. Is there any insight you can give us into what it's like once they're dead? Is it better? Is there any pain there? What happens once the horrible thing has happened?
I think the main pain for them is seeing us suffer here on earth. I think that's more what they worry about. And they try desperately hard to give us proof that life exists beyond this life. And I think they want us to live, and I think that's the hardest part. But sometimes they become earthbound, so I find that can be difficult because they want their story told or they want the truth to come out. So sometimes they will hang around for that side of it. But they're not feeling that pain anymore when they are passed. I think it's more the suffering that they see the families go through, because so many families really fall apart after they've lost a loved one, especially if it's a child. Mm-hmm. Sometimes families only focus on the child that's lost and not the living ones. So that can make it very difficult. So it's a very hard time for everybody.
There's a lot of missing people out there. I wanted to ask you because there's some cases that keep coming up and up and up, and one of them was William Tyrrell.
Yes.
Does he come up for you?
Yeah, he has. Initially I got a little bit of information about it, but I knew that the police officers on that case are not open to psychics, and unless they came to me, it was no point me putting energy into something that wasn't going to be listened to. And there's so many thousands and thousands of other missing people, so I try to put my energy into the ones where I feel I can make a difference. If they had reached out to me, yes, I would have assisted if they asked, but no, I wasn't asked. And I've got quite a lot of other cases that I still have. I've been assisting on some in Canada over there. There's been some in America. So I have ones all around the world. But I do it all remotely, so I'll be here and then I will be able to tune in, because I can tune in through photographs as well. So, and then watching the photograph or looking at the photograph, it actually takes me in. It's like a doorway. And then I can actually see what happened to the person or what the perpetrators look like and all the events leading up to it.
This is a lot to take on. Does it mentally, physically affect you doing this?
I think physically, yes, it can. It can get quite tiring and draining. I don't see people in person anymore, which has probably been better for me in some ways, because I used to suffer really badly with migraines. I don't get them as much now. But yeah, it is emotionally draining because you've actually got to connect with that energy, and I've got to lower my frequency or my energy to pick up on that sort of negativity. Then it's trying to get it away, clear it.
Clear it.
Especially when you're going to murder scenes and you're seeing it all around you, It's quite frightening. I mean, going out up at Murphy's Creek was horrific, where the girls were murdered. But, walking around the streets, there might be an alleyway and I think I don't want to go up there, someone's died there. Or you're driving along and you feel that someone's been murdered in the bushes. And my husband probably thinks I'm a bit paranoid sometimes.
He must know now, though. He'll be like, yeah. I know why we're not going down there.
Yeah, well, I know too much. That's a problem.
Can you turn it off?
Yeah, I like to just put my headphones in and listen to some music or go and binge something on Netflix. I did have one day and I didn't pick up anything. It was really weird. I was really sick one day and I just lost everything. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, like psychically, not in real life. And it was so quiet and I thought, oh my gosh, it's gone. But then it came back a couple of days later. I don't know. One of our friends had died that day and I think he was sort of wanted the limelight because it was all about him.
Did you miss it in those few days?
I did, because I thought it was just too quiet. I think I'm used to all the noise now.
You're never lonely.
No, that's why my first book's You're Never Alone, because I'm not.
What do you want other people to understand about, do I call it the spirit world? What do you call it? Yeah,
I call it the spirit world. Well, it's an alternative universe, really, and I think it coexists with us. They vibrate on a different frequency. So I suppose the best way to explain it's a bit like a radio station. Somebody's on one band and someone's on another.
And for those listening who do have a missing or a murdered family member and they still don't have answers or there's unanswered questions, what do you say to them? Or can you help them or can they help themselves?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think it's paying attention to the subtle signs that you get from your loved ones. And I suppose just working with the police, my dream would be that we have a group in Australia that's sort of, of dedicated psychics that can work with law enforcement. There is a group in America called findme.org, and I was a member of that for a while. It's just I've been pretty busy, so I didn't get a chance to do it. You've got to be quite active in it. But they have retired law enforcement and they do crimes all over the world and they have a really high success rate. So they have psychics. They'll give people the coordinates and picture of the person, and then all the psychics tune in. They all put their information in and then it's collated and then they give it to law enforcement. So I want to do something like that here. That would be a dream.
Do you think it's one of those things that we just need a few more years or decades under our belt? You know how, like, for instance, psychology back in the day used to be kind of poo-pooed. Do you think that this is similar? Like one day people will accept it more?
I think so. And I think we are behind in Australia because in the States and in England and even in Europe, they use psychics all the time. I think it's just being open-minded. It's not thinking that the woo-woo or the psychic sort of stuff is going to solve it all. It's a matter of using it as a tool.
Thanks to Debbie for joining us on today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about Debbie, you can find links for her books as well as her website in our show notes. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Gemma Barth, with audio design by Madeline Joannou. The executive producer is Gia Moylan.